Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to those of you on the West Coast, and welcome to today's webinar on diversity, a result of a transformed corporate culture. I'm super excited today to have this webinar. We filled up all of our seats, so I'm glad that all of you can make it. So if you do have teammates that aren't able to join, it's because it's full right now. So if they do ask, let them know that. We'll send out a recording after this webinar. My name is Charles Summers. It is my pleasure to be serving as your moderator today. We've got a lot of great content to get through in about a 45-minute window before a 15-minute Q&A at the end. So if you have questions at any time during the presentation, please use the GoToWebinar questions queue and we'll answer them during that 15-minute Q&A at the end. If you'd like to reach out to me about any Humantelligence webinar questions or future webinar topics, feel free to reach out to me directly at charles.summers@humantelligence.com. or you can just chat me directly on LinkedIn as well. So how are we helping right now? In light of the pandemic, we're doing a number of things to help organizations reestablish their cultures and with working remote. So if you like what you hear today, I'd love to set you up with a 30-day trial of Humantelligence to help reestablish and set up culture targets, among other use cases that you'll see today throughout the presentation. On the remote work front, we have a great new Chrome, LinkedIn, and Slack plugin that'll help you communicate and collaborate with colleagues based on their underlying culture, give you tips for communicating, that kind of thing, as well as a remote work scorecard to help you be more effective when working away from the office. Once I hand things off, I'll put a link to all these items in the chat, but I'll also send them out after the webinar with the recording and slide deck as well. At this time, I'd like to introduce you to today's presenters. We have Humantelligence CEO Juan Betancourt, co-founder and senior managing partner at APC Holdings, and one of our board members as well, Franz Alphonse. We've got our co-founder of Humantelligence, Carrie Leidick, and then our Humantelligence social media manager, David Sternberg. All of our presenters are going to bring some really great perspectives to today's conversations. Right now, I'm going to hand things off to Juan. So go ahead and take it away, Juan.
Thanks so much, Charles. Appreciate everybody making time today to join and talking about a very relevant topic as we're seeing in our society. We're going to go over today the current state, kind of which is the old school way of thinking about diversity, and then the future state. I'll open that up. We're going to get into some of the outcomes and effects of your culture change on diversity, if you can establish a change in your culture. And then I'm going to hand it off to one of our teammates here, not only to Franz, who sits on our board, who you just saw, but also to David Sternberg, one of the employees at Humantelligence, to talk about how and why he joined Humantelligence and how, even from an applicant perspective, you can make a massive impact on getting diverse candidates, and his story is a great one. Then I'm going to hand it off to the co-founder of Humantelligence to go over the 4 steps to shift your culture. So that's where it goes from concept to a how-to. For many years, both culture and diversity have been conceptual, and it's been really hard to figure out a process change or an action item, how to do it. And so Carrie's going to walk through how Humantelligence helps, redefine culture to a culture of inclusivity and diversity in organizations, which as an outcome of a new system leads to more diversity, not through putting quotas in. And then we're going to have a Q&A session at the end. So our goal today, we want to show a different way to achieve diversity in the workplace by placing emphasis on underlying culture change. One of the things from our last webinar, before I go into this slide, was we had a panelist, Karen Jahl-Madsen, who several of you heard, and she said something really powerful about racial injustice and equality in the workplace. She said basically we need to move away from an us versus them mentality and move more to this inclusivity where all stakeholders are included in defining what that looks like. Now, most of us on this call, I'm 50, many of you who are probably 35 and older, have known diversity, the old school current state, which is now in flux and needs to change, as kind of a mindset of decades old ideas, frameworks done in the 60s and 70s around, quote, affirmative action, quotas, driving, high potential programs. We need this number of people promoted by a certain race, ethnicity, etc. That has failed, and it has failed the people they've put in those roles, because it's really a band-aid to a bigger problem, which is the actual system and the culture of these organizations are not diverse in their thinking. They're not allowing inclusivity. And so if you can change the system and the culture, the byproduct or output will be diversity and diverse candidates. And it starts with hiring. And so we at Humantelligence, that's all we focus on for the last 6 years through HR technology. All those shortcuts on the current state of diversity do fail, and they continue to fail, and the focus is too narrow to get desired results. The future state, well, the future state isn't a program or department, okay, but rather an outcome. One day, just like companies that are very strategic don't need a strategic planning department, right? You need a strategic planning department if your company, if everyone in the company is not being strategic. But great companies that are well run, like Procter & Gamble, everyone in their mandate at every level of the company is thinking strategically. They don't have a strategic planning group. Similarly, one day when this is solved through better culture organizations, there won't be the need for a chief diversity officer and diversity inclusion programs when, in fact, the state of the steady state of that organization is a culture of diversity of thought, which leads to inclusion and diverse candidates. So similarly, that's what the ultimate objective is for a future state at your organizations, and you should think about it that way. It brings a focus on inclusion as the main driver, which leads to diversity. And it broadens the definition beyond race and gender to things like diversity of thoughts and to having millennials achieve levels high up in the organization. So that's kind of what we want to frame this call today, this meeting. And at the end of the day, if you can just change the way you think about diversity from the way it's been thought of to the way that we're presenting here, and that many thought-leading companies are presenting it in these current times, that will be a win for us and for you, just to change your mindset. Next. And we don't want to say that you should do diversity for diversity's sake. This isn't a question around doing the right thing anymore. All the data shows that it's a business imperative. Diversity is no longer, well, it just looks good. I mean, that is the wrong reason you should be doing this at your companies. Okay, all the metrics, all the KPIs show, whether it's this McKinsey study on the screen now or other studies, there is a greater ROI, there is a return on investment, there is a higher performing organization if they're more diverse. So let's look on the left side here. This is diversity just at the senior executive level and the board level. So, let's say top 10% of execs at a company. By gender, if you see the left side, the 15, 21, and 25, if you have gender diversity, okay, organizations that believe that diversity and gender matters, just philosophically, outperform other companies by 15%. Those who deliver diversity, deliver their company execution plans to a diverse organization in terms of a percent of people being diverse in terms of gender diversity, outperform the lower performing companies by 21%. Overall, companies win in the marketplace by 25% more than their competitors if they have this diversity in gender. Now, if you look at ethnic diversity, the three numbers on the right in their 30s, 35, 33, 36, it's even more outstanding, the performance of an organization. So not only should you be thinking about female, male diversity, gender, but ethnic diversity, when the philosophy that ethnic diversity exists in an organization, they instantly will outperform companies that don't have that philosophy by 35%. When they actually have a percentage of their employees that are more diverse ethnically, they outperform by 33% the lower performing companies that don't. And diversity in the marketplace, they actually outperform and win in the marketplace by 36%. Next, Charles. The McKinsey study that we just went over, It's interesting, that study, the whole title of the report in Harvard Business Review magazine was that diversity wins, but how inclusion matters. So people need to really make this connection that what really drives diversity is inclusion, or we call it Humantelligence, diversity of thought, which leads to inclusion, which leads to diversity. They even call it at McKinsey the business case for inclusion in the diversity, where the old school, 90% of us, including myself, for many years called it D&I. Think about calling it IND. And why? Because sometimes it's being more inclusive leads to diversity and not the other way around. And so not that there's a right way of calling it, but just start thinking differently about the order and sequence of what leads to diversity. Next. So there's many types of diversity, okay? And they can all be achieved through culture change. The one that everyone talks about, the first two, gender diversity, very important. Ethnic diversity, where we have a lot of the quota and affirmative action programs from the 60s and 70s, both in academia and in corporations. Generational diversity. This is the challenge that many companies are having, where they argue we can't keep millennials. They come and they leave, and we can't get them in our management ranks. Well, part of the problem is it's kind of looking back, and in the Peter principle, you basically promote people who have succeeded in the past. And in this case, if you look at the high potential competency model, it's based on the last 30 years of what competencies were right for those leaders at those organizations. And if they were mostly white males, well, those competency models are going to be weeding out people who are not thinking like white males. So think about new competency models for millennials, for Asian Americans, for African Americans, for Native American Indians, for Hispanic Americans. Also, you can have diversity in skill sets. So in marketing, you might want a team that's diverse in skill sets. So two people in the same role, you might want to have diversity in skill sets. That often leads to a better outcome, more productivity, more problem solving, and creativity. Lastly, but not least, is the highest form of diversity. Diversity of thought, because within diversity of thought, you can have all of those other diverse ways of being. And so diversity of thought is actually where Humantelligence focuses in changing the culture of an organization to guarantee diversity of thought, not only in how you manage people, promote people, train people, but how you hire for it. And when you actually instill diversity of thoughts, as we've done with hundreds of clients, okay, that diversity of thought will lead to diverse composition of organizations. It's fixing the problem at the core, not just trying to insert people at the end based on affirmative action or quotas. Next. Charles, next. So, and before I introduce my next speaker, one conclusive point about McKinsey and a lot of the thought leadership out there on diversity, many of these consultants and many of even internally the C-suite, it's still stuck at a conceptual level. Okay, McKinsey, they are like the doctor diagnosing with those statistics how diversity of gender and ethnicity is important. What we at Humantelligence are here to help you with is how to translate that into an actionable program through technology that's scalable, that impacts 100% of your employees every day of their workflows and thinking. So that's the difference, going from a diagnostic perspective to a Humantelligence HR tech aspect, which is prescriptive with a platform that can kind of enable and make it actionable. But now let me introduce David Sternberg. He is our social media manager here at Humantelligence to talk about a real example where just the type of products you use in recruiting can lead to a more diverse workplace without ever having to think about diversity, but because it's built into the process. Go ahead, David.
Hi, everybody. So I'm going to be tackling diversity of gender specifically today, and I wanted to address what Juan just said about offering inclusivity leading to diversity. So if you're offering an inclusive environment, you're going to have people coming in that want to stay. A great way of an example of that is when you're taking data from possible candidates and you have them fill out their gender, race, etc. If you're only offering a male and female binary system for somebody checking off their gender, that would automatically be a problem to me, and I really would not give that company a lot of thought in staying there. Juan also just mentioned millennials possibly leaving after they join. That's just unappealing to me and shows that the company is outdated and on the wrong side of history. Now, after you offer those options to have different boxes to check off, you have to show that you're not just offering them to have them, that you actually care about them. Validate the people and the choices that they pick. Right at the bottom of the screen, you'll see my results from taking the Humantelligence assessment. I got creative, maverick, and go-getter. And you can see that the business persona animations have a mix of male and female presenting individuals. This is because when I did check off the box, I chose Humantelligence's third option, which is gender nonconforming. And you can show that it's not just a box, they actually care about it by presenting you with results that match what you chose, which might seem like a small thing if you are cisgendered or cishet, but it actually shows that Humantelligence cares about who's using their software, and they want to reflect whoever's taking it so they can see themselves in their results. You can go to the next slide and we'll see that there are a plethora of animations, not just male, female, white, black. They've really chosen enough caricatures to showcase whoever's taking this. So when you are offering these options, I also want you to check your motivation so that you know it's not just a box, because your motivations for diversity are going to show through your actions. A great way to show this through actions is by asking questions when necessary. So if you do have an employee that chose a third gender option that you're not familiar with, ask them a question about it specifically, ask them their pronouns. And a small microaggression that I would address is not asking somebody their preferred pronouns, but they're just pronouns, because they aren't really preferred, they're what that person uses. Be open to they, them, which is something that's new and might be more millennial than the boomer generation. And then if you're not doing this, I want you to encourage your culture to evolve by implementing these different strategies, because if you are fostering a safe and inclusive environment, people are going to want to stay there and be inclined to tell their friends to come and even seek out companies that have these options. So overall, you'll be able to have a more diverse workforce and diverse candidate pool just by offering these kind of basic inclusivity options to have. And you can keep going with the next slide for whoever's going to speak next.
Thanks so much, David. Really appreciate that. Now I'm going to introduce both a friend, but also a board member of my company since I took over as CEO. His name is Franz Alphonse. He's been described as the, quote, future face of conscious capitalism. He's the co-founder and senior managing director of APC Holdings, an entrepreneur in the world of M&A, and a business strategist, an author, and philanthropist. His companies usually generate about $2 billion in revenue with over 10,000 employees globally and across many industries. He's the forthcoming author of a book that will be called Total Inclusion Capitalism, due out next year. And this is going to present a model uniquely thought out by this thought leader, Franz, for the largest corporations in the world to be able to simultaneously address multiple corporate citizenship objectives by consciously leveraging M&A activity, technology, and community. Not only is he a great presenter, a great mind, but he also has a great education, both from Duke University and has an MBA from Harvard Business School. Franz, take it away.
Thank you so much. Such a delight to be addressing all of you, and such an honor to be affiliated with Humantelligence at such an extraordinary time in our history. It's worth mentioning that looking at that historical context, part of what's going on is certainly the extent to which the entire planet's been knocked off of its axis by virtue of the COVID-19 virus. But there is another element going on in our society at the moment here in the United States, and that's obviously what some are already calling the rise of the new civil rights movement. Okay, it's almost like an earthquake going on at the same time as a hurricane. But where Humantelligence is concerned, it's an extraordinary time to be serving as a thought leader to our clients and to the overall market, helping to navigate these changes. Juan has made a great deal of discussion around the way that corporate cultures are changing, but our overall national culture is also changing. And on the slide that Charles has provided for us here, I talk about what's precipitated the unrest that our culture is going through right now, and candidly, some of the responses that our corporate friends have brought to the table. There was a study back done in 2018 by the Institute of Policy Studies, and importantly, what they found was that the average African American household has experienced a decline in their wealth of 75% in the last 30 years. The average Latinx household in the same time period of the last 30 years has experienced a 50% decline in their wealth. However, importantly, the average white household in the United States has experienced a 14% increase in that same time period. Okay, make no mistake about it, these statistics and these trends are absolutely contributing to some of the unrest that we're experiencing right now, and it feeds directly into the narrative around why diversity and inclusion is so important. Now, part of what I do in my work, not only with Humantelligence, but in my full-time day job with AP Capital Holdings, part of what I do, in a nutshell, for those of you who don't work in private equity or mergers and acquisitions, what I do is I marry M&A activity or mergers and acquisitions activity or buyout activity, in some cases, in the case of Humantelligence, venture capital, with large-scale pressing corporate citizenship objectives like supply diversity, inclusion issues, climate change, sustainability, and a number of others. Charles, could we go to the next slide? I recognize that within earshot of my voice, there might be a number of individuals who work among the Fortune 1000. This message is not just for you, but really for all of us as we think about what we could be doing to address some of the imbalances that I just mentioned or made reference to on the prior slide. Humantelligence happens to be certified as a minority business enterprise, or MBE, which means that it typically interfaces very regularly with the supply diversity function among the Fortune 1000. As we think about some of those imbalances, supply diversity could be very, very important, and is a very, very important function within the Fortune 500. What is supply diversity? Supply diversity is a corporate function typically focused on addressing and advocating for business relationships between the corporate parent and suppliers or supply chain partners that are owned in whole or in part by groups that historically have been disenfranchised. It could be a woman business enterprise or minority business enterprise, veteran disabled enterprises. Typically among the Fortune 1000, it represents a function that advocates for and looks for compelling ways to engage in these relationships. Critically important in the environment that we're in. I can't overstate it. To the extent that the corporates want to have an impact, supply diversity is probably one of the first places to start. And as I interact with Fortune 500 executives or Fortune 1000 executives, I often ask them to think about supply diversity as a global phenomenon and as a billion-dollar function, not as a function typically dedicated to working on small-scale projects. In order to tackle the challenges that we face, and the size of those challenges are significant, the size of the engagement is going to have to be significant as well. The second thing that I point out is that insofar as we're looking for solutions, those solutions have to be highly profitable for everyone, whether they're quote unquote diverse or not, right? And if working together, we can find transactions or business platforms, investment opportunities, supply chain solutions that benefit a wide swath of individuals and entities, all the better. Charles, could you just return back to the other slide, please? Nope, other direction. Thank you. And then the last thing that I would point out, and certainly this is something that Humantelligence is very dedicated to, especially as we engage with our multinational clients, engage in an open innovation approach. to problem solving. Okay, to the extent there is a challenge in managing for culture, or making a shift within the new cultural dynamic, with so many people working out of the home, and recruiting and hiring and culture management being an issue that needs to be focused on. To the extent that diversity itself in your supply chain is a challenge, whatever the case is, we're here to be thought leaders, and we're here to be supportive, and taking an open innovation approach where you're bringing multiple people from different walks of life and different stakeholders to the table to help solve for those challenges, whether it's myself in my capacity as a member of the board of directors, or Juan in his capacity as CEO. We're here to work in a collaborative way to find mutually beneficial solutions for everyone else. Okay, Charles. Yep, on to the next.
Thanks, Ron. I'm going to kick it back over to Juan. Juan, go ahead.
Hi, everyone. So now we're going to enter the how-to part, but before we do, just a refresher on what we define as culture here at Humantelligence, and how to establish that target culture and drive inclusion. Next. And by the way, let me just go back, Charles, to that previous slide. Just want to reiterate, kind of at a high level, what basically Franz is talking about. There's a reason why he's on our board and why I report to him. Because what Franz is talking about is much bigger than just diversity impacting talent. Franz is talking about economic power inclusion. I mean, that would solve a lot of the problems in our society, right? So it's first economic power inclusion. And how does that impact your company? As Franz said, it's not about just candidate selection and promotion. It's inclusivity in how you run your companies, including supplier diversity, right? Yes, hiring, talent management, promotion, successions, all of that's important, but supplier diversity is also very important. So all of you on this call should think about that as well. It's a whole united effort across not just your people, but the way you run your business and who you do business with. Okay, next slide, Charles. Okay, so culture has shifted with COVID-19. It's been great for Humantelligence because many companies thought that they knew their culture and that they had it defined in a little booklet. And in that booklet, the culture was, everybody memorized what the culture was. But the reality is, now that people are working remote, people realize that, wow, the work environment, whether you're in an office or far away, whether you're part of a belonging of a team physically or virtually, that actually is part of culture too. And so if you're a startup that's an innovative culture, well, now you have to be innovative and remote. If you're a big company that's very, Six Sigma continuous improvement structured, and everybody was on site, well, that's easier to maintain that than when everybody's working from home. Culture has changed, okay? And now, though, there is data, companies like ours that can give you data on where your culture was and where it is now and what you want it to be, so you can do a roadmap and get there. So this is the perfect time to work on culture, which means working on potentially a more diverse and inclusive culture. Next. So this is the Lloyd definition of culture. PwC and most large organizations who study it with hundreds of industrial psychologists, they all agree. Culture is basically three things, okay? And we've highlighted those three things. We call it BMW, behaviors, motivators, work styles. So we've summarized the theoretical conceptual definition by Deloitte here on the slide 19, and by PwC and by many others before us. We just summarized it to BMW, okay? Behaviors, motivators, work styles. So what is that? It's the culture is the way things get done. That's the W in our definition. Okay, it's the same patterns of behaviors. That's the B in our definition. And over time, they're supported by shared experiences or values, and that's what we call motivators. So BMW is basically what they define as culture for any one or group of people. And when you roll that up, again, bottom up, not top down, culture is not defined by most organizations that study this and who are the thought leaders as a command and control top down thing. Culture is bottom up, it's your people, right? If you roll the data up, culture is what transforms individuals to a collective cohesive whole. So if you rolled the data up of the culture of 5 people, 10 people, you now have team culture, a collective group. And if you do it for 100 baristas at Starbucks in Miami across 10 stores, that's the culture for the Miami Starbucks organization, which could be very different than the Starbucks organization of 100 people in Boston at those stores. And when you continually reinforce this, okay, it helps make business decisions, confront challenges, and implement new processes. That is their definition. Now, next slide. Moving from the conceptual McKinsey type culture or PwC or Deloitte, let's show you how we then connect the dots to an actionable thing that Carrie, our co-founder, will then show you how to at your organization. So culture, taking from these other thought leaders, is not your company vision or mission. It's not your employee benefits or perks, right? Apple and Microsoft have two different cultures, yet they could have the same exact benefits. They also could have the same engagement survey results where 75% of people are super engaged, 10% are somewhat engaged, it's just a job, another 15 or so aren't happy. That doesn't mean that Microsoft and Apple have the same culture. So be careful with engagement surveys. That's a Band-Aid, emergency room problem that you're looking at, and it's not solving the issue, which is true culture. And leadership, Procter & Gamble, where I used to work, they always said you could get rid of the top 10% of all executives, yet Procter & Gamble culture wouldn't change and the company would still operate great. Think about that for your companies. If you're worried about losing all of your top 10% and the culture might not stay in place, well, that's because you don't have a good culture then, because it's being command and control from the top. Everyone should have their aspirational culture defined on, a booklet, memorized for your engagement surveys, monthly engagement surveys, and pulse surveys, and on company t-shirts and on the wall. However, the reality is what your real culture is might be your aspirational, but imagine measuring it to see what the gap is, and that's what we call culture. It's your people, their psychology, the work environment they create and reinforce at the team level, behaviors, motivators, and work energizers. We measure 28 things across those 8 behaviors, 12 motivators, and 8 work energizers. The behaviors is basically what other assessment tools like DISC, predictive index strength finders measure, MBTI, motivators, we measure kind of what Hogan and Lominger measure, and then very few companies measure what work environment gives people energy. And we do all of that in 12 minutes. Nobody can do it in less than an hour. Now with that, I'm going to introduce now my co-founder of Humantelligence, a very bright guy, Mr. Terry Leidick, who's going to walk you through on that next level of how-to and action item for how Humantelligence can help you. Go ahead, Kerry. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Juan. You're a tough act to follow. I mean, everything I've heard so far, and in putting this material together, it's been super exciting for me because this is an area very close to my heart. It's something that I've done in my entire career, over 25 years, working with organizations to try to crack the code on this inclusion, and diversity, approach, bringing more people into the equation, giving more opportunities for people who want to work hard and contribute. And I think the organizations that are able to do that faster and more effectively are going to be the ones that win in the marketplace. And we want to work with those kind of organizations. I want to do a callback here to our last webinar, which was a panel of experts. And one of the experts that we had as a guest on the panel was Karen Jaw Madsen. She's an expert on organizational culture. She's an author, a speaker, and she actually instructs, she leads a course at Stanford on organizational culture. She has a great book on how to co-design a culture and bring it throughout, the process in an organization, throughout the organization to transform it. I'd really encourage you at the very bottom of this slide, which is going to be in the material that you get after the webinar, there's a link there that includes a 4-minute video, which is a snippet from our last webinar of Karen describing these 6 steps of addressing inequality in the workplace, a very important topic right now. One of the things that I understand, and the challenges that organizations face and our community faces, our country faces, only, and Franz would know this data better than anybody, but only 1% of CEOs are Black. Only 3 or 4% of senior executives, are Black. Diversity and inclusion programs and shortcuts, have not worked. They're not going to work. And what I like about what Franz has said and what Karen says on bullet number 4 here, which is about engaging in community and empathy-driven co-design. You see a definition of that down below. This is about what Franz mentioned around that open innovation approach. This is one of those big, hairy issues, that organizations have to tackle along the lines of climate change, technology, the speed of technology change and automation. It meets that level, and so it goes beyond just the doing the right thing. It will be a basis on which organizations will be able to compete and win, or go extinct. So I want to bring that, much attention to it. I'll let you kind of read through those items. I won't highlight them because I want to get to the steps. Let's go ahead and jump into it. Now, this is the Humantelligence methodology about establishing culture targets and enabling inclusion. It's 4 steps. You're going to see all of this in the material that's followed up. So I just want to make sure that we leave plenty of time in the last 15 minutes for Q&A and for the presenters on the webinar to answer questions and all of that, and make sure we cover that. So I'm going to go through this fairly quickly. We're happy to follow up and dig into details. But step 1 is always going to be about measurement. You've got to set a baseline. We've got the BMW framework that Juan talked about, understanding what are those behavioral styles and preferences that people are bringing to work every day. What are their values and motivators that are completely hidden to you until they get revealed, sometimes surprisingly, after you hire the wrong person. And then the work energizers that people bring to the job every day, which really is insight into where are people spending their discretionary effort. So if you want to understand how to engage people, understand their work energizers and plug them in to go. So there's a lot you can get out of just the measurement process and revealing those data points and mining that data for all kinds of uses. Step 2, moving on to that step in the process, is we got a note here. Okay, so step 1, let's go ahead. Let's mention this. We wouldn't be doing our job if we didn't say we have a platform that you can use for this. It's called Humantelligence. Okay. Now, Juan talked about opinion surveys and employee engagement surveys. There are definitely places to use those surveys. And one of the things, in point number 1 that Karen makes is make a commitment to address the issue. Okay, something that I'm seeing out there with organizations that are getting serious about inequality is that they've moved away from calling their D&I survey or their inclusion survey. They're calling it a racism survey. Okay, so those companies that are being bold, they're going out and they're doing a pulse survey, and it's called the racism survey, and it gets right at the crux of the matter. They're collecting data on gender and ethnicity, and they're analyzing the data, and they are trying to uncover, how people are feeling about that topic, and they're not doing it from fear. They're doing it from this place of needing to create a culture of inclusivity. And I really respect those companies that are tackling it that way. Let's go on to step 2.
Yeah, and Carrie, I'm just going to jump in real quick because I have a bunch of questions on the same thing.
Okay.
Yeah, so I have a few people asking the question on, do we have the questionnaire available for them to take? Most of you on this webinar have already taken it, from what I can see, but there's a handful of you that have not. You can go right to our website, just enter your email address in that very top section on the homepage. You can take it for yourself, or you can sign up a team. And if you'd like, we can also do, you know, a little bit of a team culture mapping exercise with you as well. So that's something that we offer. So you can go right to our homepage and take the assessment, so you can get your own underlying culture and, you know, your own BMW. So anyways,
Perfect
I'll kick it back to you,
Charles, because what you see here is, you know, a screenshot of a team culture view in the platform. And as Charles described, you can go actually put your team in there and take a look. It's a start. It's a great place to start. So were there any other questions, Charles, or comments before we move on?
None for right now.
Okay.
Thanks.
Step 2 is then about, once you set that baseline, is about identifying the critical measures or factors that out of all of the measures that you now have for specific teams in order to optimize the culture that will deliver the results the team needs to deliver. There is such a thing as teams that are misaligned in their cultures, and you also have for people performing well in their particular roles. So Humantelligence allows you to, you know, very quickly identify those gaps and those strengths, and then apply that, you know, in a number of different use cases, from, you know, internal mobility to hiring and everything else. So let's move on to step 3. Okay, unless I'm surprised by another slide. Yes. So establishing diversity of thought. Okay, so this is about, just a note back to why is this important? Diversity of thought is that the high performing organizations are more likely to value diversity of thought, you know, which means that 88% versus 41% for lower performing. You know, so those, in other words, those companies that value inclusivity, diverse perspectives, are the ones that are more correlated with higher performance. Also, higher performing organizations are 3 times more likely to assess individual and team preferences and working styles. In other words, what we're talking about with the Humantelligence assessment. So let's go on from there. Okay. This step 2 is about becoming intentional with your culture. So most organizations have what we call a culture by default. You know, they hire for skills, they hire for competencies, they hire for resume, background, experience, and they assemble a group of people, and then they execute, and then the culture emerges. What we're suggesting is challenging that notion to become intentional, so that now that you've set the baseline, you can look at how you're looking toward the future and identifying, you know, what's going to actually optimize and deliver the results that you're looking to achieve. I'm going to put Juan on the spot for a second just to make a comment on this. This is actual Humantelligence data, and let me tee it up for you, Juan. So 4 years ago, Juan became the CEO, and I got to say, he probably spent about a year just trying to figure out what this thing was and get his legs under him and understand, you know, exactly where we are in the market and set up the board and everything like that. Then he began a culture transformation initiative, and this is a snapshot of the before and after on what we call our work energizers lens. Of the team, of the entire team of Humantelligence. And I want to ask Juan to comment about where you focused and what you were able to achieve in that transformation.
Yeah, and just to be clear, there's a typo. The picture on the right should say after. So the left side, yeah.
Exactly. Oh, they're not both before? No.
Yeah. So
my bad. That was my fault. Yeah,
no,
sorry.
On the before, if you notice, the creative, most of the people on my team, and my team was my company, right? We had like 16 people. The culture was, if you can read that, on the top of that right side, so on the left picture of a team culture before, on the right side of that picture, it says creative energy environment. Left side says systematic. And so if you notice, what I inherited was a really creative team, okay, that was very, into working with new solutions, innovative, freedom. So they had very unique perspectives, and very few people who believed in putting in proven methods, naturally, structure, predictability. Now, imagine once we got to a point where we had a great product, a great positioning, the worst thing you could do to scale is having so much creativity that you have 100 different invoices, 100 different training sessions, 100 different ways of implementing. So it was actually what was our biggest strength when I took over the company became our biggest weakness. Culture had to change. And so using our own tool, we then were able to train the existing employees that we kept and then hire to complement. So if you look at the after on the right side, you'll notice that under systematic environment, there's an increment of about 12 different faces because we hired to balance the team and have more inclusivity, more diversity of thought, and now we're really succeeding and scaling. So that's what I did, and I used our tool to change that culture. Thank you, Karen.
Yeah, thanks, Juan. Appreciate it. All right, well, let's wrap it up, and let's just finish up in the last couple steps. So what you do third is to set those target cultures. Juan just summed it up for you. For the team of Humantelligence, also for roles, and then you develop culture change plans as he described. And then fourth, what we do is drum roll, you select the right people for the target culture that you're trying to create. Now, selection, also could mean develop the current workforce to identify where those blind spots are, make sure that the self-awareness is being built, at a very high level, drive emotional intelligence throughout the entire organization so that that awareness can be brought to bear, and it can be looked at objectively. So you can use the data to just reduce the subjectivity, in the way that you're functioning, and then be able to make objective decisions about who's the right person for the team that will be additive to the culture of intention that you've created. And then, the end result being, the inclusivity that you're seeking. So let's wrap it up with just a summary and just a recap. I think we have so many people on the webinar, there's a delay in the slide loading. So as a recap, it's measure, identify, set target cultures, and then select the right people. And then, you've got your 30-day trial of Humantelligence to try this out. And we would be delighted to work with you, to get a proof of concept going and show you how it works. So with that, I'm going to hand it back to Charles, and I'm sorry for taking an extra 5 minutes out of the Q&A part.
Yeah, thanks, Carrie. I appreciate it. And like Carrie said, we do have that 30-day trial. So if you like some of these steps that Carrie shared, we can definitely help you with those things, among other things as well, reestablishing your culture post-COVID-19, things like that. The infographic that I provided earlier shows a little bit of those steps to reestablishing that culture and ramping back up hiring, things like that. So with that said, I'm going to move into the Q&A session. And the first question here, so I've got a few queued up here, so feel free to get your questions in if you do have any. We've got about 9.5 minutes left. So this first one is going to be directed towards Juan or Carrie or both of you. The second question is going to be for Franz. So just so you know that's coming down the pike, Franz. So this first question here, Carrie or Juan, feel free to jump in. Shouldn't the competency model be based on critical success factors for the organization going forward, independent of gender, ethnicity, generational, etc.? So talk about, Carrie or Juan, talk about how performance metrics play into the mix of maybe the 4 steps that Carrie shared.
Right. Juan, you're going to leave me alone on this one? You know, you're the one I was talking about.
You're the expert. You're the expert. That's why I'm giving it to you.
Yeah, well, what Juan was referring to around competency models, you know, is what he said was competency models are developed by people who have found success in the organization, you know, in its current state, in its current cultural state. And they can be subject to bias, you know. So what he said, you know, is basically, you know, if all of your leaders, you know, have found success in the organization are white males, it will bring a certain bias to it, because custom competency models are developed through, you know, the subject matter experts that are providing input, which are the incumbents in the roles that have been successful. And so that it naturally comes with a bias. And so you have to just be careful about that. By no means is Humantelligence saying that you should not use competency models. Actually, it's the opposite, you know, starting with the business outcomes in mind, the strategic business outcomes in mind, and then backing into them from there, you know, I would pose is the right approach. You know, not from, you know, role definitions that come from, you know, or opinions of incumbents in roles that have been there for a long time, if you really want to make change in the culture. Do you think that answers it, Charles?
Yeah, I do. Thanks. Franz, I'm gonna direct this next one to you. What do you see as contributing factors to those trends that you spoke about earlier on the income inequality?
Yeah, that's a terrific question, and you know, one that you know, literally books have been written about. What I will say is what my focus is when I think about systemically, the biggest solution or the most effective intervention that we can take as it pertains to some of those income and wealth and inequality issues that I'd referenced. In my mind, education. In my mind, education has got to be at the top of the list of interventions as a society that we've got to move forward with. There are a number of models around the world where individuals, it doesn't matter what your racial background, it doesn't matter where you were born, what's your zip code, what's your socioeconomic status. There's some countries in the world that require every child from the cradle to the grave to receive an equally high level of equally high quality of education, regardless of your background. And if we had something like that similar here in the United States, in my personal opinion, you know, that would go a very long way in addressing some of those disparities that I spoke about. The second thing is there is a role that more so than even our government, but our corporate partners can take. There are billions of dollars that are spent annually in the process of addressing supply chains around the world. To the extent our corporate partners can say, listen, we want to be intentional and we want to be proactive around ensuring that a certain amount of that spend is being attributed to or focused on minority communities or minority business enterprises, that would also have a massive impact. And there are a number of companies that are thought leaders in this space. Procter & Gamble is one of them. And Procter & Gamble, I'm not biased because I'm a P&G alum. It's actually where Juan and I first met 30 or so years ago. But Procter & Gamble really is a thought leader in this area. And what they have said is, listen, if we want to engage minority communities, it's because it's good business sense. And as a result, we're going to take dramatic efforts to ensure that we are engaging not only with minority-owned businesses, but spate of different types of supply chain partners, because it's important to us in our culture, and it's an important business imperative. So to address your question, education, I think, is a huge component around why those wealth and income disparities persist. And then within that context, to the extent that we have functions dedicated to finding ways of engaging with minority-owned businesses, that would be also a very helpful intervention that could be taken as well.
Perfect, thank you. This next question is going to be directed again to Juan or Carrie. On BMW, what are examples of motivators and work energizers? Just maybe give a handful of those examples. And I can go back to those slides too if you need me to.
Go ahead, Carrie.
Sure, yeah, so the motivators are based on a personal values framework. There are 6 core motivators that everybody has that apply across culturally around the world. They're just human-based needs that people have. And an example of one would be a valuing of altruism. And it kind of ranges from, you know, the attitude or the value that people need a leg up in life and we need to help others, or people should really pull themselves up from their bootstraps and they're kind of on their own. Those are 2 kind of polar opposite types of, you know, values that people hold on that scale. So there are other ones, you know, such as, you know, valuing authority or order, what we call order, or valuing individualism and freedom. So marching to the beat of your own drummer, or, you know, appreciating, you know, citizenship and you know, loyalty. So those are 2 examples. There's 6, and it comes out in a very easy to understand profile that then leads into, you know, something that David shared early on. He shared that he has a maverick persona. Now that's related to what we call the freedom motivator. And that's also associated with being an entrepreneurial, highly creative person. So it all ties together into a very easy to consume, you know, kind of feedback that comes out, but it's all based on about 40 years, 50 years of science on the topic of social and personal values that came out of Harvard in the 60s and 70s. That was the initial research.
Perfect. Thank you, Carrie. We are out of time. I will say there's probably 15 to 20 more questions. I think what we'll do is Carrie and Juan, David and Franz, we'll all get together. I'll shoot you guys an email and we'll talk about some of these questions that we have and how we can answer them post webinar. I think we can start a thread with some of you and reach out to some of you with some answers to your questions. But I do want to say thank you for everybody that showed up today. We had, over 1,000 people were registered. We had over 500 people show up today. Really, really happy that you were able to join us today. So, take that survey after the webinar. As soon as you leave, it'll pop up. Go try out the remote work scorecard, and feel free to reach out to me directly about the 30-day trial, or you can go sign up from that page that I shared earlier. Look for an email from me to follow up the webinar with all the handouts and other materials, and let me know if you have any questions. So again, once more, thank you to all of our presenters, and thank you to our attendees for coming out today. Thanks.